So you have a financial plan, you have the gaps. Early on, start to identify what the options are to close those gaps. So it doesn't become a last minute, how come you did that? Why are you springing that on us? Require the executive to identify the gap closing options early on. Eliminate the reliance on one shop that is too much to provide how we've done things. Another piece of it is I think, multi-year budgeting. Do a 2-year budget.
I was going to ask that because
do
I know Connecticut's been doing
budget.
that for many years.
And there's always going to be flexibility. You know, if you do a 2-year budget, well, sure, into the first year you will learn more. You may have to tweak what you're going to do in the second year.
Because they do that routinely.
Yeah, but at least if you start. The biggest challenge, I think, and look, I was in the legislature, and I know you worry about the session you're in, you worry about that budget cycle, you worry about the election cycle. You're not worried 4 years, 5 years down the road, and that's been one of our big problems, you know, because we have short-sighted analysis and decision-making, we haven't had a long-term plan to deal with a structural, long-term balance of recurring spending and recurring revenue. And if you had a multi-year budgeting process, you would start to force a different mindset. And I think that would be good. I think it would be welcome, and it would also help local governments. It would help hospitals and not-for-profits who depend on, say, you look at a year like this, or last year's probably a better example. You know what the whole year was like. So a budget was put in place. Then a few months later, there were cuts. Then a few months after that, there was a deficit reduction plan, more cuts. Well, you know, the school districts, the localities, the hospitals, not-for-profits, they already started making commitments based on what they were told in April. And as the year went by, they found out there were cuts, or they were going to get the payment, but instead of the payment coming on X date, 3 months later, they're still waiting for the payment. The kind of dislocation and crisis management that then transfers from Albany to all the other stakeholders who depend on state funding, it makes a very bad situation intolerable. And I think if we have a more conservative approach to how we're analyzing the amount of money we have available to spend, and have a multi-year strategy that at least would give some basic sense as to where we're at, localities can plan, not-for-profits can plan. You know, it's an interesting phenomenon happened with the school district this year. The budget wasn't until August. The budget votes for school districts were May 13th, May. And most districts, not all, but most, anticipated the worst numbers that were on the table, which were the government's effective.
That's routine.
Yeah.
That's routine.
But what happened? The predictions were that it's going to be like New Jersey. The budget's going to go down. People are upset about taxes. And in New York, by and large, the reverse happened. Because the districts took a more conservative approach and were honest about it with their citizens. And I think, and again, I'm generalizing, obviously not the case everywhere, but I think the citizens said, all right, we're in a tough time. The districts are being frugal. They're making some tough choices. I know in my community in Long Island, spent a lot of money on schools, but you had wage freezes being agreed to and concessions by teachers union, which you haven't seen in a long time. People understood the severity of it, and the public responded, even though they weren't happy about the tax increases, though they were more modest than had been anticipated, but there were still increases at a tough time, property taxes, or how you fund the schools outside of the city, and people voted by and large, and 92% passage rate. And it wasn't that they said, oh great, you know, what they said is we get it, and we understand. We also understand that schools are an important investment, a lot to do with the reputation of the community. And it was interesting because then the legislature, you know, tried to put more money back in. The governor vetoed it. You remember some of that drama. But the schools had already tightened their belt, and I felt they got it in a way that when they were debating again about additions to the budget, it's like, wait a minute, but the people already accepted the fact that they had to do with less. So